So the habit quadrant has 4 parts: the thoughts that you're thinking, the emotions that you are experiencing, the beliefs that you're walking around with, and then the actions that you're taking. And so it's really quite simple. If there's something that somebody that you want or I want, say I want to say I want to do an Ironman triathlon. I can just make a quadrant and say, okay, what are the thoughts that I should be thinking? What are the emotions that I should be feeling? What are the actions that I should be taking? And what are the beliefs that I should be walking around with? And the great thing about the internet these days is that if you don't know what they are, there's somebody else who's probably blogged about it, created a video about it, and you can just copy them.
Yeah.
And of course, find your own. But so I use that habit quadrant all the time. I just make a big cross and I just fill that in. And then I walk around with that for like a day, a week, a month, and just practice that thing. Okay, like, how do I want to feel? How do I want to think? How do I want to believe? And then what am I going to do? And that framework I find is really powerful for people, because what it leads to is it leads to a change in identity. And identity is really what allows us to do what we can do. There is one thing that just about every single person struggles with, and that is imposter syndrome. I've never met one person, unsuccessful or extremely successful, that doesn't run into a situation and think, what the hell am I doing here? Am I making a difference? Is this right for me? And am I any good at this? And one of my a good friend and mentor of mine, David Lesser, he's a high power executive coach, brilliant man. And I just remember him talking to me about how he was like wondering if what he was doing was making an impact. And I just thought, wow, if this guy feeling like that, who's the best I've ever seen, what does that mean for me? And what I realized after working with so many clients is that imposter syndrome is a sign that you're in the right place. Because what it means is that you're stretching yourself to a point where you actually begin to question. And having that self-doubt, I look at as a healthy sign that you're in a place where you're actually being stretched. My dinner table, there's actually 2 answers here. The first was from basically 0 to 6 years old. That was when my parents were still together. And so I definitely have, there was that inflection point when I was 6. But in general, I would say a lot of intellectual conversations. My parents, both of them are Jewish, which makes me Jewish. And so there was that inherent, I'm just going to say, intellectualism of the Jewish culture. There was a lot of discussion about politics. There was a lot of discussion about, like, there was a lot of questioning, asked to, how do you think about something? But also a lot of judgment too, especially from my dad. My dad is a brilliant man, artist, but also extremely opinionated. And one of the gifts was that I hopefully channeled some of that brilliance. One of the downsides was that I also channeled some of that over opinionatedness, which took me a while to program myself out of. But in general, it was a lot of intellectual conversations and a lot of just, I remember dinner always being a very interesting time for the most part.
Yeah, I love that. And obviously, I'm sure that probably parlayed into some of the things that you're doing today, being, the leader, of masterminds and consulting, men and all of that. So that makes perfect sense. Were you exposed to any type of entrepreneurialism early on, or was it not till later that it kind of bit you?
So I actually got bit by the whole entrepreneurial bug fairly early. When I think I was in fourth grade, I would take my mom up to Payless and I would buy a pack of NFL football pencils and
Okay.
take them back to school and I'd sell them to my classmates for a quarter each.
Yep.
And I'm not exactly sure why I started that. I think it was a bit of frustration about not having the stuff that I wanted when I was a kid.
Mhm.
And we didn't have a lot of money growing up. So I wasn't really exposed to it too much. But incidentally, my grandmother and my grandfather, who died before I was born, they were both very entrepreneurial down in LA. My grandfather had his own business. And so I feel like I'm the inheritor of that lineage in
I
many
love
ways.
that. Yeah, love it. Love it. What did your grandfather do? What type of
He
business?
built he built steel swing sets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And he had his own little fabrication place in West Los Angeles. I mean, this was back in the 50s when there was still,
Yeah.
kind of semi-industrial stuff there.
Yeah. Very cool. Very, very cool. So what happened next? Did you go the college path, or what was your next steps there?
Yeah, I did. I ended up going to college, and before I actually graduated from college, I got inspired to start a company. I've always been very environmentally focused, and so I started a company my last year of college. And it was a clothing company using organic and recycled and hemp and all of that stuff. And it was successful in terms of getting it out there. We had about 100 accounts, and it was working, except for the fact that it wasn't working.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had no idea how to manufacture and was messing things up left and right. And that crashed and burned. But that was an incredible education in business for me.
Yeah,
And
sure.
that led to my next business, and kind of the rest is history. But yeah, that was a incredible lesson in business building and an incredible lesson in being humbled as well.
No, it makes sense. And at what point did you start getting involved in I don't know if it was masterminds first, or if it was more the coaching side, or
Yeah.
what was the
Well, yeah, the coaching thing was somewhat unexpected, and really a natural evolution. So after I went out of business with the clothing company, I had some relationships with some Japanese companies. And so they asked me to manufacture a line of clothing for them, which didn't turn out so well. But what happened was I started a small chain of surf shops, retail stores. And along with that, I created a website in like 1997 and started selling stuff online. So grew that into a $5 million business, sold it a little too soon. But I was completely burnt out at the time.
Yeah.
And I ended up in China, traveling around. I got inspired by acupuncture. So I became an acupuncturist and did that for about 9 years.
Wow.
And I was in the Bay Area at the time. I had so many tech people coming to me over and over and over again. And yeah, they were there for their health, but we also started talking about business. And so, funny enough, I kind of slowly transitioned into coaching. And I remember the very day, one of my clients came to me and she said, Jonah, I love coming and getting acupuncture with you, but the real reason I come is to talk to you.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, that's interesting. Maybe I'll change my business model. And so I switched it. And that led me to working with people and coaching and doing masterminds and doing some corporate consulting around health and wellness, and which, kind of the rest kind of leads into itself. I work at Stanford part-time now, working with their business school students in experimental communications, and yeah, that's a whole thing.
Interesting now. And you mentioned the health and fitness thing there. I think you have an Oura ring on there. Yes.
I do. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah. I actually just got my my sizing kit
Oh,
yesterday, 2 days
cool.
ago, something like that. So yeah, so I'm going to be ordering one too. But yeah, so have you always been into health and fitness and keeping yourself, in
Yeah,
good shape? And
I think it was a natural extension of growing up where I did. I grew up in a very, very rural area, Mendocino County in Northern California. Um, my parents were kind of hippie-ish. We had goats and chickens when I was growing up.
yeah,
We had a
cool.
garden, so it was kind of like I didn't really have to think about it too much.
Yeah.
And I was always into playing sports and all of that. And so the fitness and health thing comes very easily to me, which in terms of working with people is both a blessing and a curse, right? Because it's like things that are easy for me are difficult for other people sometimes.
Yeah.
But I still, I understand that health and fitness and being close to nature is one of the fundamentals, I believe,
Hmm.
of just, being a happy person,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. And do you help coach that to, a lot of your students as well, your clients?
It depends. Many of them totally have that dialed in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about it. But it is very interesting that, oftentimes I will get a client who, I mean, I have a client right now. She's incredibly smart, pretty successful, and she just has a real issue with her daily healthy habits.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's constantly sabotaging what she's able to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's like, hey, the most important thing is get out in the sun in the morning.
Yeah.
That's
Yep. Get
where
that
we're
in
at.
your eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's
Yep.
just back to the basics. It's always back to the basics. So the short answer is yes, but it's not the primary focus. I used to run people's genetics and blood
Hmm.
work and all that
Hmm.
fun stuff. And I like to do that, but I prefer more of an exploratory relationship with
Hmm.
people rather than me as the doctor saying, okay,
Yeah. Let's do
do this,
this. Yeah.
do that, do that,
Yeah.
right?
So what does that look like then? What types of things do you start with? And I guess two parts of that question. Where do you start? And then what types of paths does it, typically take? Is it, again, obviously there's a certain health element to it, but then, obviously there's going to be business and personal and all of that. I mean, how does that all interconnect?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know the exact answer to it because I find that it really depends on the person that I'm sitting across from talking
Hmm.
to, right?
Hmm.
You have your own path, and I mean, I would turn around and ask you and say, what do you think? What do you think has held you back, and what do you
Hmm.
think has propelled you forward?
Hmm.
And if I were to ask you, what's the biggest thing that's held you back in your life? What would you say?
Yeah, that's an interesting switch. I would probably say, um, not necessarily being so difficult on myself, right? Like,
Yeah.
I have very, very high standards for myself, and
Yeah.
sometimes I sort of get, I don't know if it's analysis by or paralysis by analysis,
Yeah.
but I'll sit there and think about things, maybe longer than what I should, rather than just taking action and doing whatever it is that I'm thinking about doing. Because eventually I end up doing it anyway. It just takes me a long time to be able to get there and say, okay, I'm going to do this. So,
I can totally relate to that issue. So in that case, that's kind of a self-worth,
mhm,
self-confidence, intuition type of issue. And so in terms of how that might guide us, we might dive into that and
mhm,
then use a framework that I developed called the Habit Quadrant to address the specific issues that might come up around that.
yeah,
So, in terms of self-worth for a long time. I knew I was good at what I did, but I wasn't convinced that I could help anybody. I thought, oh, I know how to help these people, but if someone shows up and, they're like multi-hundred millionaire, oh my God, I'm intimidated by them,
Yeah.
right? They accomplish so much. I would compare myself to them. And so, yeah, we would let that particular thing guide us. But I'm a big fan of frameworks.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
And a huge fan of frameworks. And so what I like to do is to identify what somebody really, really wants, and then ask, the 5 to 6 questions of why do you want that? Why do you want that? Why do you want that? And it really gets down to like the self-worth, finding love, love and grace for ourselves. Finding meaning, all of these sorts of things. And when we connect to that, then what extends out of that oftentimes is so much more real and more powerful for folks.
Yeah.
So I always like to ask, like I've always wanted a Lamborghini. At this point, I'm like more towards electric cars, but I've always wanted a Lamborghini. Yeah. But why do I want a Lamborghini? It's not about like being cool and driving one. It's about the fact that I really like to go fast.
Okay.
I like to play. And so for me, it comes back to like, I like to thrill myself.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. So do you also like to go like physical things too, like, mountain biking, skiing, all those types of things as well? Is that like part of your personality of you always seeking that thrill, if you will?
Yeah. My ex-girlfriend, who I'm great friends with, called me up the other day and she said, Jonah, I just realized you're an adrenaline junkie, aren't you? I said, yeah, I am. I'm actually recovering from a pretty severe injury I got in Hawaii surfing about a month ago. But yeah, surfing big waves. We were at a mile offshore, surfing 25 foot waves in Hawaii. And I got
up on North Shore there, or is that?
Yeah, we were on the North Shore, surfing. And it was I actually separated my pelvis, which is a pretty severe injury.
Oh, man.
And luckily I have that health background and I know a bunch of doctors. So I've been doing everything from stem cells to peptides to acupuncture to everything, and I'm healing up quickly. But it was pretty scary. So the answer to your question is yes.
Yes, definitely.
I love to scare myself and all sorts of things.
That's incredible. It's incredible. So if you were to sort of draw a picture of when people come to you, what their life might look like, and after they've seen you, what are some of the breakthroughs, the realizations, what types of things would they start to I guess be more self-aware about, that they may not have noticed originally?
Yeah, it's a good question. The main thing that I shoot for with any client obviously is what they want, but the number one thing is, I believe fundamentally that we are all tremendously powerful beings. And what that means to me is that you have a superpower, I have a superpower, and often these things are much subtler than we think of. And what that means to me is that, can you get into a place where what you're doing is not without effort, but feels like play, feels like flow, feels like you're in the zone? And what I found is that we don't have to do much to create that. What we have to do is get the crap out of the way, preventing that flow from happening. And that can look all sorts of ways. It can look like, familial stuff. That's why I loved your question in the beginning about what your dinner table was like. To, oftentimes it does come back to that familial stuff, but it can come back to traumatic stuff or beliefs that we have. thoughts that we repeat over and over to ourselves, or it
Mhm.
can be from not getting out in the sun in the morning
Yeah.
and getting that serotonin going.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very much so mindset, it sounds like. I mean, it all sort of revolves around the mindset of the person, and being able to understand what made you the way that you are. Well, do you have any sort of frameworks that you might be able to explain to,
Yeah.
I guess, sort of extrapolate some of that, or explain a
Yeah,
little bit more of that?
100%. I do. And one of them is what I call the habit quadrant. So I struggled with my personal habits for a really long time. I spent a good amount of time at meditation retreats in my 20s. I did a 45-day meditation retreat once,
Wow.
meditating 10 hours a day, for 6 weeks. And I came back home and I actually couldn't maintain a daily practice. And so I had to understand what habits were and how they worked. And so I created a framework around habits. But after you start to understand how habits work, then it comes down to, like you said, mindset. And what I consider mindset is more of like body set.
Mhm.
Like what are you thinking? What are the thoughts that you're having? So the habit quadrant has 4 parts: the thoughts that you're thinking, the emotions that you are experiencing, um, the beliefs that you're walking around with, and then the actions that you're taking. And so it's really quite simple. If there's something that somebody that you want or I want, say I want to say I want to do an Ironman
Mhm.
triathlon. I can just make a quadrant and say, okay, what are the thoughts that I should be thinking? What are the emotions that I should be feeling? What are the actions that I should be taking? And what are the beliefs that I should be walking around with? And the great thing about the internet these days is that if you don't know what they are, there's somebody else who's
Yeah.
probably blogged about it, created a video about it, and you can just copy them
Yeah.
and of course find your own. But so I use that habit quadrant all the time. I just make a big cross and I just fill that in, and then I walk around with that for like a day, a week, a month,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
just practice that thing. Okay, like, how do I want to feel? How do I want to think? How do I want to believe? And then what am I going to do? And that framework, I find, is really powerful for people, because what it leads to is it leads to a change in identity.
Mhm. Mhm.
And identity is really what allows us to do what we can do.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
if you feel like you belong somewhere, it's going to be easy for you.
Yeah. Yep. And I think we've all been in those situations too, where, you know, you join a new group or you join a program or whatever it is, and the people there, you just click with, you just connect with. And you're right. I mean, it is so much easier when you are able to actually, connect with people without, you know, prior knowledge of them, or prior introductions to them. Um, just everything becomes more natural, and everything just flows a little bit better. um, you've had a lot of experience with a lot of different types of people, and high net worth people that are up and coming, we'll say. Is there a common path that you have found that a lot of people seem to struggle with, or is it really sort of all over the place? Is there any?
There is one thing that just about every single person struggles with, and that is imposter syndrome.
Mhm, mhm,
I've never met one person, unsuccessful or extremely successful, that doesn't run into a situation and think, what the hell am I doing here?
mhm,
Am I making a difference? Is this right for me? And am I any good at this?
mhm,
Um, and one of my a good friend and mentor of mine, David Lesser, he's a high power executive coach, brilliant man. And I just remember him talking to me about how he was like wondering if what he was doing was making an impact. And I just thought, wow, if this guy
Mhm.
feeling like that, who's the best I've ever seen, what does that mean for me? And what I
Yeah.
realized after working with so many clients is that that imposter syndrome is a sign that you're in the right place.
Hmm.
Because what it means is that you're stretching yourself to a point where you actually begin to question.
Mhm.
And having that self doubt, I look at it as a healthy sign that you're in a place where you're actually being stretched.
Interesting. Interesting. And a lot of that would have, would relate back into the confidence too. Would you agree? I mean, obviously you have to have the confidence to be able to, step out and initially set foot in whatever that new path is. And then, now you're looking around like, what am I doing here? So uh, is there an element, I guess you can say that people, again, up and coming people, maybe they're lacking confidence, and that could be something that they can work on to be able to boost this ability to be able to get into this situation where they're stretching themselves? Or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think confidence is actually a bit overrated. I think it more comes down to humility and the willingness to learn.
Hmm.
Um, we're always trying to be confident, but confidence comes through experience.
True.
The
Yeah.
only way that you're going to get experience is if you're humble enough to learn and be a learner. And so again, the most successful people I know, the highest net worth people I know, are people who are constantly putting themselves into the state of being a complete amateur.
Hmm.
They're always surrounding themselves by people who know more than them and are smarter than them.
Yeah.
And so what I find with people who are kind of coming up, a lot of times their insecurity, right? Which they think, oh, I need to be more confident. Actually, that's not what is needed. What is needed is to start to like create some grace for
Hmm.
ourselves
Hmm.
and some love for ourselves so that it's okay if I'm insecure.
Hmm.
I don't know much about podcasting, but I could come to you, Matt, and I'm sure you could give me a master class on how to be a great podcaster. And I would just have to like realize, wow, I kind of suck at this.
Yeah.
I tried
Yeah.
to do a podcast before and it was fun, but I just couldn't really sustain it. And so I would have to come to you and just really understand like your mindset and how you approach things in order to be like, yeah, man, I'm not good at this.
Yeah.
Help me
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Well, if you ever want to create a quadrant around podcasts, let me know, and I'll do my best to.
I will probably I have a podcast in my mind for 2022, so I'll definitely reach out to you
There you
about.
go. Yeah, anytime, anytime. No, I love that. I love that. Well, what have you ever been in a situation where someone has some type of a blocker that you didn't know what to do with, or you couldn't sort of figure out what is the right path for you, or where should you go?
Yes.
Explain that dynamic, I guess, a little
Yes.
bit.
Yeah. So I was talking to my dad about this. In many ways, I'm the recipient of a lineage between my mother and my dad, both helpers. My dad was a collegiate volleyball coach for many years,
Love it.
so very experienced with coaching. And I was talking to him about like what makes people coachable
Hmm.
and what makes people not coachable. And what I have found is that there is somebody who may show up to do a consultation with me or whatever. And it took me so long to figure this out. I'd be like, why are we not getting anywhere?
Hmm.
What's the pattern here? And what I realized is that we all have conflictory beliefs,
Hmm.
right? So when I sold my company in 2005, I made a good amount of money and I pretty much lost all of it.
Hmm.
I had almost $1 million. I was like 32 years old and I pretty much gave it all away, bad
Mhm.
invested it away, used it
Mhm.
all, yada, yada, yada. And what I realized was that I had this idea that if I had money, my father wouldn't love me.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because his parents were depression era people, and so he had this very narrow view of what it meant to be wealthy.
Mhm.
And I adopted that, and I didn't know I had it. It was unconscious, and it wasn't until I lost all that money that I realized, oh my God, I didn't need to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the way that relates to your question is that we all have conflictatory beliefs. Like, I want to, if we take the wealth thing, I'd like to be wealthy, but I don't feel like I deserve it. I'd like to create a lot of impact, but who am I to do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And many people, when we point that out, hey, like, it looks like we may have some conflictatory beliefs. It's like a revelation. Oh my God, I didn't realize I had that.
Mhm.
For other people, they go into defense mode and they're actually not able to uh, realize the paradox. Oh my God, I have these two conflictatory beliefs. They're holding on to their beliefs so hard that they're
Mhm.
not able to see that. And what that comes down to, again, is this issue of identity and the willingness to be wrong,
Yeah. Yeah.
to be uncomfortable, to actually like get to the point where it's like, ooh, I feel really, really bad and I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's really about the expansion of our emotional range, of the ability to have really high experiences, but also the willingness to be anxious and depressed
Mhm.
and to
Mhm.
sort of be okay with that.
Yep. Yeah. Live in that
Makes
world.
sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense. And I can absolutely say that, I've experienced those exact same things. What came to mind as you were going through that was, just a few weeks, it might have been Thanksgiving. I was having a conversation with, I started dating a girl a few years ago and I had never met this part of her family. And, I was explaining what I did, and obviously podcasting is part of it, but, I have had a number of other businesses in that, and they were just so like awestruck of me, and I'm thinking like what I've done is no big deal, right? I mean, to me that's what I did, right? I mean, but I still
Yeah.
have all this other stuff that I want to go and do, and they're looking at this like, wow, I can't believe that you've accomplished that. So that's kind of where my mind went when you were going through that process of being willing to step out, into your discomfort zone. Whereas I think a lot of people, like, they confine themselves to their comfort zone and are not willing to be able to make any steps in any direction, no matter what it is in their own life. Like that guy, I'm sure probably, I don't know, maybe I inspired him to do something, but as far as I know, I don't think in the last month he hasn't changed anything or started to learn even or take steps in that direction, that I offered. This is what I did when I started. So that is really, 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 really interesting. So I guess, to bring this all the way back to, someone who might not necessarily have done, quote unquote, done anything in their mind, right? And that's the way that I feel. I haven't done anything yet, but there's all kinds of different layers there, right? Right. There's all kinds of different layers there. Um, how do you identify, like, I guess, how do you identify what direction should I go, to to take a step in the direction that I want to go, even though they might not necessarily understand what direction they want to go. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. And, you know, one of the things that is important when we don't know what direction to go is to identify. I always ask people, what's the most difficult thing you've ever experienced in your
Mhm.
life? And for many people, that's a very deep question because many of us have been through, very difficult situations, abuse or, you know, being ostracized or watching people die, whatever it is. If you can identify that thing that you've been through, there's something that you learned from that.
Mhm. Mhm. I would absolutely 100% agree with her, because and this is actually something that so when I was 16, when growing up, I was very, very reserved. I didn't really talk to very many people, didn't have all that many friends, but my dad was basically, my best friend all weekend long. I looked forward to being able to spend time with him working on the house. He was always tinkering with something very, very handy. And then when I was 16, he passed away. He drowned in Cape Hatteras. So, the complete shock, right? And it took years to get to this point, but I realized shortly after he passed away, I basically said, screw it. I don't care what people think about me. Life is too short to worry about, other people's opinions of me. So then I kind of opened up. I had all kinds of friends. I was popular. Had I been living the same life that I had lived prior, there's no way that I would have created a podcast. I'd be too afraid of, getting getting on with someone, who doesn't know me, or I don't have that relationship established with. So, so I completely identify with that. And I think that's, for me, that was one of the things, I've learned, no matter how bad the situation is, I always want to try to find the positivity in whatever that thing is. And that's what I would focus on. I wouldn't, obviously I'd give anything to have my dad back today, but that was one thing that sort of shifted my complete trajectory of my life. So I completely agree with, trying to focus on, other things to be able to, take a positive spin, I guess, on whatever the situation is.
Well, yeah, I mean, your story is, that's a real story, right? I mean, total tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And within tragedy, you were able to actually find a gift, not that you would ever trade that, but look, the thing about the past is the past already happened. So there's nothing we can do about it. But the fact is that you found your own strength. You found your own truth in that. And we all have these. Every single person listening to this podcast, every single person on the planet has been through things that are difficult, and you have learned something from that. And so by going back and saying, well, what have I learned from these difficult situations? And then on the flip side, think about the most amazing experiences you've had in your life. Maybe it was like watching a child being born. Maybe it was hanging out with your friends on the top of a mountain. Whatever it is, you learn things from those experiences as well. Mm-hmm. And so when we combine these lessons that we've learned from our very difficult experiences, and we combine them with these lessons that we've learned from these very amazing experiences, and we put those things together, there's almost always a theme. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that theme, I found, is much more related to what your purpose is here on this planet. And so it's a lot easier than we think. People get stuck in their head, but all you need to do is start looking back at your history, and it's already there.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And do you specialize in working with, obviously you specialize working with men.
Yes.
Any particular industries or problems, challenges that they might be struggling with at all?
Yeah, I mostly work with tech people because I'm here on the West Coast. I was in the Bay Area for a long period of time, but I don't work simply with tech people. I have clients all over the world, and have some really interesting businesses and all of that. And again, it's so much simpler than we make things out to be most of the time, because myself included, I'm always scrambling everything up in my head. Oh God, how do I do that? How do I do that? How do I do that? And it really always, to me, it just comes back to what is it that really brings you the most alive? Mm-hmm. What is it? Mm-hmm. And if you can connect with that, maybe you're an accountant, and what brings you alive is watching other people feel free in their lives. Mm-hmm. Well, you can do that as an accountant.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
No question about it. You can do it as an accountant. You could do it as a plumber. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's actually the approach that you're doing it with. Mm-hmm. And the more that we can create the approach that we want and integrate our purpose into our approach, what I found is the more that, and this is kind of mystical woo-woo stuff, the universe will start to open up opportunities for you to do that more.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. That makes perfect sense. I mean, align with the direction you want to go, and those opportunities will open up. This is such a great topic. I love talking about all of this, Jonah. I mean, if people want to learn more about you, your services, or connect with you, what would be the best way to reach out and get in touch?
Yeah, so they can go to my website, jonahlarkin.com. And then I did create a special landing page for your listeners to download some of these frameworks. It's just jonahlarkin.com/secret sauce.
Perfect.
I am on Instagram, Jonah Larkin, Twitter, Jonah Larkin, LinkedIn. Yeah, I love talking to people. So feel free to reach out, and can have a conversation, introduce yourself. I just love people. So
beautiful. I love it. Jonah, many, many thanks. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Matt. It's really a pleasure.